Al prende la luz. No.
Hello, everyone. Buenas tardes a todos. We'll give folks a moment to log on before we get going. Buenas tardes a todos. Vamos a darles todos un momento antes de comenzar. Give folks another second before we get going. Vamos a darle todos un segundo más antes de comenzar. So we'll get started with today's meeting. Vamos a comenzar esta junta. So welcome, everyone. We are going to start with our Zoom interpretation instructions. Antes de comenzar, vamos a darles instrucciones para acceder al servicio de interpretación. Primero esto lo vamos a hacer en español y luego en inglés. So I'm going to share the interpretation instructions first in Spanish, then in English. Para las personas que nos acompañan hoy a través de sus tabletas o iPad o de su teléfono inteligente, o smartphone, a favor de localizar el menú en forma de 3 puntos en la parte inferior de su pantalla. De ahí pueden seleccionar Language Interpretation o interpretación del lenguaje y enseguida pueden seleccionar su idioma, en este caso el español o Spanish. Para todas las personas que nos acompañan hoy a través de su computadora,
Sí.
y Carmen, para todas las personas que nos acompañan a través de su computadora, pueden localizar el símbolo de interpretación ahí en la forma de globo en la parte inferior de su pantalla. Hagan clic ahí y después elijan su lenguaje en español o Spanish. Ahora voy a darles instrucciones en inglés. Here are the instructions in English. For all those joining us tonight through their tablets or iPads or through their smartphones, please locate the menu in the form of 3 dots on your screen. You can click there and then select language interpretation and then select language of your choice. In this case, it would be English. If you're joining us through your computer, you can locate the icon in the form of globe for interpretation at the bottom of your screen. You can click there and then select English as your language of choice. If folks do have any issues with the interpretation channel, do let us know. Jazz King and also Brisaviles are on the call. Let us know in the chat. We'll try to figure out if there are any issues and then try to address those for everyone. Some reminders for folks. Remember, we have the raise hand feature, something that's really helpful for our team just to make sure that we navigate and queue up some of the presenters, some of the questions that come up for them. So just as a reminder of those tools. Our meeting agreements, so we want to make sure that we create space for everyone to contribute, that we step up and step back. Sometimes we want to take that moment and hear from others. That only one person speaks at a time. This is both for order, but then also for interpretation. We want to make sure that they're able to capture those notes from everyone. That we listen to each other, that we respect each other's opinions, knowledge, and perspective. Be conscious of time. These agendas are packed. We want to make sure we're hearing from everyone and everyone has an opportunity to contribute, ask questions, and have their comments be heard. And then making sure that we speak slowly and clearly for the interpreter. There's always a little bit of a delay, so we want to make sure we account for that. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Brisa. Brisa's going to lead us through our roll call for our CSC members.
Thanks, Christian. Okay.
Ay, yo también. No, pero ya está aquí. Hasta que lo
All right. So as always, we have our roll call. I'm going to go ahead and starting with Alicia Sanchez,
Presente.
Andrew Aguilar,
Good evening, I'm here.
Brian Vernetti, Ashley Valentin Gonzalez,
Present.
Carmen Arroyo, Carissa Ayala,
Here. Carmen Arroyo. Aquí.
and Carissa Ayala,
Here. Aquí estoy.
Carmen Gaxiola,
Presente.
David Ramos,
Here.
Jack Monger,
Jack will be absent
Jack?
for this meeting.
Yeah, Jackie's on vacation. This is Maxie Hatch. I'm here.
great, thank you, Nancy.
Hi.
Janice Luna Reynoso,
This is Sayete Carrillo. I'm here for Janice as a proxy.
okay.
De los términos.
Jonathan Torres,
Jonathan Torres no longer attends these meetings. He switched positions in the company, so he should not be listed as primary any longer. I should be, and my name is Liana Lino, and the spelling of the last name is Lienau. It's misspelled on the roster there. Thank you.
thank you, Liana. We'll make sure to change that for the next meeting.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Jose Marquez Chavez, Brent Burge, Josephine Talamantes, Carla Nava,
Here, presente.
Keith Corey,
Here.
Carrie Robinson.
This is Kat Mattel sitting in for Sandag for Carrie Robinson.
Thank you, Kat. Jasmine Vargas.
Present.
Thank you. Philip Gibbons.
Here.
Peter Eicher.
Present.
Margarita Moreno.
Present.
Thank you. Maritza Garcia. Martin Reeder. David Welch. Montserrat Hernandez.
Presente.
Thank you. Nick Creedy.
Nick's
Uh,
not going to be here tonight. This is Sergio Hernandez, the alternate, so I am here for the Navy.
Got it. Thanks, Sergio. Roman Partida Lopez. Safia Haidari. Rosalba Ayala.
Presente. Presente.
Thank you. Salvador Razo Ábrica. Stephanie Yoon. And Vanessa Contreras. Okay. We have 19 present, 14 absent, and we have quorum. Thank you all.
Thank you, Marisa. So I'm going to get back to our presentation. If it's going to bear with me for a second. So our next thing is our review of our agenda for today. So We've just done roll call. We'll next move on to our approval of our meeting minutes from last meeting. We'll have 3 different presentations as part of this meeting. We'll have an update from community monitoring on organic and elemental carbon, update from Kevin on the incentive update, funding itself update, and then also wrapping up with a conversation on the post 5-year framework. So Sean will be leading us through that section. Then that'll lead us to public comment, and then we'll adjourn for today's meeting. Our next slide, I'm actually going to pull up our notes from our previous meeting from October. So at this time, I would like to open up the floor to see if anyone would like to make a motion to approve these minutes.
Hi, Christian. This is Andrew. I had a question more on the timing as far as when we're able to review the meeting minutes for comment, because I recall asking for it a couple of times during the last couple of weeks, and then it was delivered last Friday. So is there typically a time frame by which the CSE members can expect a draft to review?
Yes, and I know for this month we were a little bit late on the posting of the notes, but I think ideally it should be happening at least within a week before the meeting itself to then allow for that review process.
Okay.
So that was something with the meeting itself being crunched up on timing itself. But we do note that and we'll make sure that that is happening and being posted on a timely manner to allow for that review.
Okay, very good. And I appreciate too that Kearns and West were able to accommodate the comments that I had. So thank you. I saw that those were mostly reflected, with the exception of, and I just wanted to point out before we bring it to the vote, the affiliations of CSE members. I had raised, I'm here, for example, as a representative of NASCO. Even though I am a member of IEA, I'm not representing IEA. There's representation already. So are we going to be consistent in which all the CSE members are going to list all of their affiliations, or will we just be our primary? Because if so, I would like to then be reflected strictly as NASCO.
Okay, and we can make
consistent with everybody else.
Yeah, and we can make that change. I think that's in line, Andrew.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So again, I would like to see if anyone would like to make a motion to approve our meeting minutes from our last meeting on October.
I'll make the motion.
Oh, Andrew, go ahead. I'll second. This is Massey.
Okay, so Andrew as a first, Massey Hatch as their second. Now we'll move on to see if there's any discussion before the vote. And Andrew, I think you already raised some items just on affiliation, so we'll make that note for future meeting summaries. So with that, we'll now move on to the vote. So all those in favor, say aye.
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 All those opposed, say nay. That confirms. So the ayes have it. Meeting minutes from the last meeting are approved. So I will now go back to our presentation. And folks, bear with me for a second. Moving on to general updates. So first update, and I wonder if anyone from Caltrans is here to add on to what we have on screen, which is the Caltrans is seeking public input on the proposed Coronado Bay Bridge Foundation rehab project. There is a virtual scoping meeting happening Wednesday, November 19th at 6 p.m. This is a virtual meeting. That Zoom information is on screen, but I do want to see if there's anyone from Caltrans on the call that could share any more information on that. And if there is, please jump in. Not seeing anyone. But this information will be sent along in our weekly digest. So if folks are interested in the topic, please join. It is going to be a virtual meeting. Moving on to our next item, which is handing off to Lauren to give us an update on what's happening with environmental justice office. And Lauren, I know it is a very brief and more of a call to action, but I'll hand it off to you.
Hey, Christian. Yeah, so this is just my monthly reminder that we're out in the community at events for outreach and education. So if you know of any events where you think would benefit from having APCD present, please reach out, let me know. This is a picture from an event we went to last month, a little different than probably your typical community event you might think of, but this one was with folks from the San Diego County Office of Education, learning about career pathways. So they spoke with some of our chemists and an engineer. So just a reminder to kind of keep your mind open. Don't limit it to what you think of as a traditional community outreach event. If you have something in mind that you think would be good for us to be at, just go ahead and reach out and connect with me, and we'll see if we can be there. Thanks.
Sounds good. Thank you, Lauren. So with that, we actually are going to move into our first presentation. So we have Kristen King and Curtis from APCD. Kristen, I think I see you, and I see both Curtis. So I think if you are both ready, I'm going to hand it off to you. And then I know that we'll have some moment, I think, or a few seconds, or a couple minutes, I think, for questions and any comments. So, folks, if you do have comments, note them down, and then we'll get a moment to ask Christine and Curtis. But with that, I'll hand it off. Christine.
Thank you, Christian. Hello, everyone, and thank you for allowing me to present today. My name is Christine King, and I'm an air pollution chemist here at the San Diego Air Pollution Control District, where I work in the AB617 Community Air Monitoring Group. I lead both the organic and elemental carbon, also known as oCEC, and the H2S hydrogen sulfide air monitoring programs. For this presentation, we're going to dive into the latest results, the 2024 Organic and Elemental Carbon Data Update for the Portside community, which plays an important role in understanding the levels of diesel particulate matter in the community. Next slide, please. As a reminder, here's the community monitoring data presentation schedule in case you'd like to look back at past presentations or mark your calendars for upcoming data updates. Next slide, please. Here's a quick overview of what we'll be covering today. We'll start by explaining what organic and elemental carbon are and how they connect to diesel particulate matter. Then we'll take a closer look at local sources of diesel particulate matter and review CERP strategies designed to reduce this pollutant and its associated health impacts. Next, we'll walk through how we collect and analyze data and introduce the air monitoring sites where we've been sampling organic and elemental carbon. After that, we'll dive into the 2024 Organic and Elemental Carbon Data Update, which will include site-by-site results and comparisons to health standards, reviewing long-term and seasonal trends, and how the data aligns with black carbon measurements. Finally, we'll wrap up with a look ahead at what's next in our efforts to monitor diesel particulate matter in the Portside community. Next slide, please. Okay, let's start with the building blocks. What are organic carbon and elemental carbon? These are two major components of combustion-related PM2.5, also known as fine particulate matter. As the graphic shows, these tiny particles are about 30 times smaller than a human hair and can travel deep into the lungs, negatively impacting our health. While both types of carbon are important, today we're focusing on elemental carbon because it's a more reliable indicator of diesel particulate matter, which is a key concern in the Portside community. To give a quick definition, let's focus on the zoomed in PM2.5 particle. Organic carbon forms the lighter, smoky outer layer. It comes from a wide variety of sources like cooking, wildfires, and other burning activities, while elemental carbon, often called black carbon, makes up the particle's dark, sooty core. It's produced when fuels don't burn completely, especially from gasoline and diesel engines. But here's the key point. Elemental carbon can be separated into different fractions based on the temperature at which it burns off. In particular, elemental carbon fraction number 2, also known as EC2, is strongly associated with diesel engines, and we can use it to estimate diesel particulate matter in the air. So by focusing on elemental carbon, especially EC2, we can get a better understanding of how much of the local air pollution is coming from diesel engine sources. Next slide, please. Let's review a few sources and strategies aimed at reducing diesel particulate matter in the community. First up, ocean vessels. These include large ships like the cruise ship pictured at the top. To cut emissions while at berth or docked, CERP strategy G2 promotes plugging into shore power and using emission control technologies such as exhaust capture bonnets. Next, we have cargo handling equipment. Think of cranes and forklifts moving goods at the port. CERP strategy G1 targets these by expanding zero emission technologies like electric cranes. And finally, hovercraft, such as tugboats and ferries. Under CERP strategy G3, emissions are being reduced by transitioning to cleaner technologies, like the launch of the new electric tugboat in June of 2024. These strategies are just a few examples of how the Portside community is tackling diesel particulate matter. Next slide, please. Now let's talk about why monitoring diesel particulate matter is so important. The serious health effects. As we discussed earlier, these particles are incredibly small. So small they can penetrate deep into the lungs and even enter the bloodstream. This is where the danger lies. According to the California Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, or OEHA, long-term exposure to diesel particulate matter poses the highest cancer risk of any toxic air contaminant they've ever evaluated. That means out of all the harmful substances in our air, diesel particulate matter is the most likely to cause cancer over time. And because it's a known carcinogen, like tobacco smoke or asbestos, there is no safe level of exposure. This slide shows how diesel particulate matter affects our health in the short term, the long term, and how it impacts different groups in the community. In the blue section, we see the immediate effects. It can cause headaches, coughing, and breathing problems. In the orange section, we see that over time, the risks become more serious, leading to chronic lung diseases like asthma, COPD, and even lung cancer. And then finally, in the green section, we see that it doesn't affect everyone equally. It has an even greater impact on children, pregnant women, and the elderly. These serious health impacts highlight why monitoring diesel particulate matter in the community is so important. Next slide, please. Now I'll walk you through how we collect and analyze organic and elemental carbon data. We start by calibrating the sampler. Then every 6 days, we collect a 24-hour air sample on a filter. Those samples are then shipped to a lab for chemical analysis, and we receive the raw data the following quarter. Next, we perform data analysis and quality assurance and quality control activities to ensure data integrity. And then finally, we organize the reviewed data into readable graphs and charts to communicate results to the public. Next slide, please. So where are we measuring organic and elemental carbon? Here's a map of both of our AB617 communities and the organic and elemental carbon air monitoring sites. To the north, we have 4 sites in the Portside community, and to the south, we have 2 sites in the international border community. Next slide, please. Here's a quick look at our 4 monitoring sites in the Portside community. The marine terminal site, outlined in yellow, sits at the end of the terminal with a panoramic view of the harbor. Then in blue, the Sherman Elementary site is next to a playground with downtown visible on the backdrop. Next in green, the Chicano Park site sits behind a bus stop near Logan Avenue and Cesar H. Chavez Parkway. And finally, the Boston Avenue site in turquoise is adjacent to the southbound I-5 entrance. Next slide, please. All right, now let's dive into the 2024 data and compare elemental carbon levels across the 4 monitoring sites to health standards. On the left, we see the chronic reference exposure limit for non-cancer effects at 5 micrograms of carbon per cubic meter of air. This is the amount of diesel particulate matter a person can breathe every day over a lifetime without experiencing non-cancer effects. All of our sites fall below that line, but that doesn't mean that the air is safe. For cancer risk, there is no safe level. Similar to tobacco smoke, even small amounts can increase long-term cancer risk. And that's why after this slide, you won't see any safe threshold lines, because for cancer risk, the goal is always to drive the levels down as close to 0 as possible. So now looking across the sites, you'll notice that levels tend to rise with nearby traffic congestion. We see the highest concentrations at the Boston Avenue and I-5 on-ramp and the Chicano Park sites. This makes sense because they're both right next to a major freeway on-ramp with heavy traffic. Next, the marine terminal is interesting because it's not near a freeway, but the ship and truck activities still brings in diesel particulate matter. And Sherman Elementary is the lowest, being in more of a residential area with less vehicles and traffic in general. So while elemental carbon gives us a good estimate of diesel PM by itself, it's not the whole picture. To better understand how much comes from diesel engines, we'll dig deeper into the elemental carbon fractions in the next slides. Next slide, please. Here's a look at the long-term trends and how the elemental carbon fractions have changed over time at Sherman Elementary School. On the left, we see EC1, or the elemental carbon fraction number 1. This primarily represents non-diesel combustion sources, such as gasoline-powered vehicles. You can see a clear downward trend in this type of pollution from 2020 to 2024. Although the 2024 reading looks slightly elevated, this can be accounted for by the uncertainty in the measurement. And then on the right side, we see EC2, which primarily comes from diesel engines. So here we see that unlike elemental carbon fraction number 1, The second fraction, or EC2, concentrations remained more stable from 2021 to 2023, followed by a significant decrease in 2024. So overall, we see both diesel and non-diesel sources are trending downward at this site. Next slide, please. Now let's compare these trends to the long-term data at the marine terminal site. Like Sherman Elementary, the marine terminal EC1 fraction shows a downward trend from 2020 to 2024. And their measured values are nearly identical. And then looking at EC2, in contrast to Sherman Elementary, the marine terminal's EC2 diesel-related emissions data showed a steady upward trend from 2020 to 2023. However, at both Sherman and marine terminal sites, they both experienced a significant reduction, with levels dropping by approximately 20% in 2024 when compared to 2023. This substantial decrease in diesel-related emissions is likely due to the cumulative impact of the CERP strategies implemented by the port and industry partners. Based on these results, we project a continued downward trend in both diesel and non-diesel related pollutant levels. These trends serve as strong evidence that the CERP strategies are effectively contributing to improved air quality within the community. Does anybody have any questions so far? No?
I do, Christine, but I'm full of questions, but just a quick one. So if I'm understanding the graph correctly, first off, elemental carbon is a subset of the overall carbon. So that's if black carbon is presented as one, EC would be a smaller part of that. And so this breakdown of EC1 and EC2 are smaller fractions. So as an example, with what I'm seeing here on this slide, the EC1 fraction for 2024 is roughly 50% for non-diesel sources. And then for the EC2, it's roughly 35% would be diesel, essentially the remainder. Is that correct?
Sure, yes.
Okay. And I just wanted to get that basic understanding so that way we can kind of see side to side these comparisons and what that means.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I see Margarita also has her hand up.
Sí, buenas noches. Mire, estaba oyendo lo que estaba hablando acerca del monitoreo. Habla mucho de Sherman. Yo vivo en National City y aquí en mi comunidad yo creo no tenemos datos de que existan de nuestra contaminación que nosotros tenemos, porque no es lo mismo la misma comunidad y aquí hay mucha contaminación. Somos unos de los más contaminados y no son los mismos datos de Sherman aquí. Y no existe ningún monitoreo ya que no hay monitores en National City. Gracias.
So, Christine, I think maybe, I guess, I don't know if you can chime in, or Curtis, on then, I think how the different locations, I think, gather information to then cover, I think, into Margarita's point, I think of like the coverage of National City.
Christian, I'm gonna jump
And
in
I see
here.
David.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm David Sodeman. I'm the chief of the monitoring division. I oversee all of the monitoring operations from APCD. Yes, the National City doesn't currently have any monitoring sites. We are actively working on those with contracts. We're hoping that they will be up and running in the near future. I know we've been saying that, but at this point, we are actively working with the cities to get permits and with the contractors to get those sites power installed, fencing installed, and get monitors out into National City.
Thank you, David. I'm seeing some comments in the chat. I think we'll wait on those comments or questions. I think Leanne, I think, got a note about just some of the data trends, I think, and understanding that in 2020 we're in COVID, so likely that resulted in less trucks on the road. So then seeing the increment in 2020 would make sense. Christine, I'm going to hand it back over to you, and I know we have a number of slides I think left over here, so I think we'll keep going through these.
Okay, thank you, Christian. Next slide, please. Okay, so before we move on to seasonal trends, I'll quickly review temperature inversions. So we'll think of the atmosphere as a big pot of boiling water. In the warmer months, like the image on the right, the sun heats up the ground and stirs the air. That rising, moving air helps circulate particulate matter, lift and spread it out, just the same way as steam escapes from an open pot. However, in the cooler months, like the image on the left, it's more like putting a lid on the pot, where the lid of warmer air prevents the cooler ground level air from rising. And just like steam trapped under a lid, the particulate matter becomes trapped. It can't mix upward, so it builds up near the ground, the same level where we breathe. This is why we typically see higher particulate levels during the fall and winter months. Next slide, please. Okay, so taking a quick look at seasonal trends, as expected, we see higher concentrations during the fall and winter months due to temperature inversion. Levels slightly dip in the winter during the rainy season, which helps clean the air. Okay, so looking at EC1 on the left, related to non-diesel sources, we can highlight that Chicano Park and Sherman Elementary show the highest levels in spring, summer, and fall, with a noticeable drop in winter. This could possibly be tied to reduced activity during school breaks and holidays. And then looking at EC2 on the right, which reflects diesel-related emissions. We see that Sherman Elementary has the lowest levels throughout the year, while the marine terminal sees higher levels in the fall and winter, which lines up with busier shipping periods. Boston Avenue and Chicano Park mirror this pattern, reflecting the influence of nearby transportation routes and overall movement of goods throughout the region. So taken together, these seasonal patterns can help guide where CERP strategies can continue making a difference. Next slide, please. Okay, so now that we've identified trends in the elemental carbon fractions, EC1 and EC2, I'll compare the two methods used for tracking diesel particulate matter, elemental carbon and black carbon. So in elemental carbon, we use discrete filter samples, so we can only get one result per day every 6 days, and it requires lab work. It's accurate, but it's slower, more expensive, and doesn't allow for real-time data sharing with the community. Black carbon, on the other hand, measures continuously and gives us real-time data, so we can see patterns by the hour, like when truck traffic increases during rush hour or when activity spikes at night. The data also uploads directly to the APCD website, allowing the community and our staff to easily access up-to-date information and take action or plan ahead when needed. Plus, it costs less to operate. Since we've already established the main source patterns using the elemental carbon fraction data, we want to switch over to black carbon to give us faster, more useful information while still capturing diesel-related trends. Next, we'll look at how well the black carbon data aligns with the elemental carbon data. Next slide, please. So this slide shows how well elemental carbon and black carbon data align at the marine terminal site, which is the site where we have the most overlapping days of data. So the scatter plot on the left shows a strong correlation, while the chart on the right shows that the differences between the two methods is much less than like 0.2 micrograms per cubic meter. And this means that black carbon is closely tracking elemental carbon, which is common when looking at long-term averages or when diesel is the dominant source. So there are a few reasons the numbers might not match exactly. Black carbon can pick up signals from wood smoke or biomass burning, and the instruments can be influenced by humidity or drift over time. But still, the match is strong enough to confidently use black carbon as a reliable estimate of diesel particulate matter. Next slide, please. Okay, so looking ahead, we're going to expand black carbon monitoring to additional sites as they become available. We'll continue working with CARB to support source apportionment studies, health risk assessments, and emissions modeling. And we'll partner with other agencies to compare our black carbon data to relevant data sets like wildfire activity and traffic patterns, so we can better understand patterns in community exposure. Next slide, please. Okay, and that's the presentation. Thank you all so much for your time. I'd be happy to answer any of your questions.
And David, I see your hand up first, and then I have Andrew as well. And David, you're muted.
All right, so now I'm unmuted and I can talk freely. So I want to thank Christine for this presentation, but I also wanted to discuss some historical context regarding both the organic and elemental carbon program and the black carbon program. You guys have, the steering committee has heard a few presentations that we have for black carbon, that we use it as a surrogate for diesel emissions. And then we just heard for this presentation that we're also using the organic and elemental carbon as a surrogate for diesel emissions. We've always intended that the organic and elemental program would be more of a shorter term program than the rest of our pollutant programs, namely the black carbon, the VOCs, and the metals program. We wanted to operate both the organic and elemental carbon program and the black carbon program simultaneously to evaluate whether the black carbon program would give us a good estimate of diesel emissions in the community. And as you've just seen in this presentation, it really does. Therefore, we have now discontinued the organic and elemental program, and we will really be focusing our monitoring efforts on instruments that can provide the community with timely data so that you know what is in your community at any given time, instead of having to wait for these data presentations. And now we are open to answering any questions that you might have on this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, David. So I see Andrew and then Phil.
All right. Thank you, Christine, and thank you, David, for the presentation. And I guess this is a follow-up to the conversation we had, David, back with the conversation regarding black carbon and kind of controlling for any potential confounding factors. And so it's my understanding that elemental carbon essentially acts as a better fingerprint for being able to identify specific emission sources of that carbon. But how, if at all, does potentially resuspended road dust, like any PM 2.5 that might have been combusted in the past, that's been settled on the road and has been resuspended, that seems to be a potential confounding factor, as well as aircraft flying overhead and other kind of conventional combustion sources that aren't diesel, that are they being picked up in the EC1 species? So it's sort of a two-part question, or like, those are a couple of confounding factors, and how are we controlling for them in this analysis?
So that's a good question, Andrew. You know, I'm trying to think back. I've been working with the oCEC program for many years. And I think one of the things that needs to be done, and maybe it has been done, is characterizing the sources with these techniques. And they have done that in controlled settings and only looked at and studied one at a time certain emission vehicles, engines, and that's how they were able to determine that when you do this analysis with the oCEC program, that diesel engines, the dark material, the dark PM that comes out is primarily in that EC2 fraction, and gasoline engines, when you combust gasoline, the dark material that comes out in that EC1 fraction. I don't know. Trying to do aircraft emissions, extremely difficult. They're big. The exhaust comes out hotter, faster, more violently. I don't know if it's been done or not. It is something that I think we would have to look at to see potentially where that fraction has come in. I think most people, when they look at doing source apportionment and using the oCEC data for that, they typically, I don't think, really take into account aircraft emissions, because it's primarily, I think they kind of view aircraft emissions as not being a dominant source in the communities because of the fact that they take off and fly and then they're gone, right? And so they're only being emitted for short periods of time, and then they're aloft and they get the emissions get severely diluted before the emissions kind of migrate to the ground, right?
Sure.
And so I don't know how much aircrafts are really considered. I'm not a emissions inventory, a source apportionment guy, so I don't know if they do, but then it becomes so small that you just don't see it in the presentations, and they only focus on the top 10 or 15. That would be something that we could bring up with CARB about how is that being potentially addressed or in the model, because you do have airports, you do have flight plans, just because a single plane is only there doesn't mean that, it's you just have that one plane, right? You do have planes that kind of come and go throughout the day all the time. So that would be an interesting aspect of source apportionment for Portside.
Okay. And I appreciate that. And I'm sorry, one last quick stinger question. I promise I'll be quiet for a while longer. Just would it be fair to characterize on the figures, because I saw that the figures were kind of scaled to be equal to each other, but just for a sensitivity check, is it fair to say that of the EC proportions that you've measured so far, that EC2, the diesel proportion, is roughly about 30% of the overall? Because I saw it looked like EC1 was on about a 2-to-1 relationship with EC2. Is that correct?
So, Christine?
Looking at the numbers, yeah, I would say that's probably an accurate assessment. Those numbers were, correct me if I'm wrong, Christine, were concentrations based. They were micrograms per cubic meter, and so you're looking at those numbers. So that sounds about right, Andrew, for what you're saying. For the concentration of total elemental carbon, then you break that up. It's yeah, that looks about right.
Okay, and that's helpful to know for the CSC, because that tells us then that the majority of the EC that's been measured so far has been coming from the non-diesel sources vice the diesel. That is a very critical key point that I would like the CSC to take note on. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, David. And Phil.
Yeah, thanks, Christine and David and others for the presentation. That was really helpful to walk through step by step. I'm not a chemist, and so this is really complicated. But the message that I'm getting from all of this is that emissions, or I should say pollution, is trending down at the sites that you're evaluating. And I think, Christine, you kind of hit that many times, so thanks for doing that. I think that's important, right? Because our goal here as a group is to drive down emissions, or emissions and pollution. So that's great. I was a little bit confused on, so the health threshold is at that one number, and all the sites are recording below it. Can you comment on what that means a little bit more for my sake? That means we're below some kind of health threshold or something?
Yeah. So you're talking the 5 micrograms per cubic meter of diesel PM, right? One of those early slides.
I don't know what I'm talking about, but yes, it
Okay.
was an early
Yeah.
slide.
So in the beginning, we showed a limit of 5 micrograms per cubic meter. That's the reference exposure limit that the California Office of Environmental Health and Hazards Assessment has put out for diesel PM. And all our sites, if you look at elemental carbon, were less than that. So that number of 5, yes, thank you, Kristen, for pulling that up, or whoever on Kearns and West pulls that up. So that is the chronic reference exposure limit for non-cancer. So this means that if you're breathing in diesel emissions less than 5 micrograms per cubic meter for a long period of time, what this means is that you're less likely to get, like, say, asthma from that. But that doesn't mean that you're not going to get cancer. So there's a different risk associated with cancer. So the cancer, and there's really, for a lot of pollutants, there is no safe level, and it's just a risk, right? And they talk about that as, like the 1 in a million concentration. So if we were to take the concentration at, say, 5 and multiply it by the cancer risk, that equates to 1,500. So at 5 micrograms per cubic meter, your cancer risk is 1,500 in a million. And I know that Rule 1210 for the air districts required permit facilities to get their total cancer risk to below 10 in a million, right? So 1,500 is very, very high when you look at kind of the Rule 1210 and what we are requesting facilities to get below. And so, these numbers at, what, 0.5 microgram per cubic meter still has a very high cancer risk associated with it.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for explaining that. And then I kind of wanted to go back, and if this is too complicated, I can table this and talk to you guys offline, but that fraction thing that on the next couple of slides, I think that Andrew was kind of pointing at, I'm interested in understanding that a little bit more too, because that wasn't very clear to me. So the EC1
Are you still whining?
is a higher fraction than the EC2, which is the diesel portion of it, right? And what importance should I take away from that?
So their numbers aren't really fractions. These are actually concentrations. So these are also in micrograms per cubic meter, right, Christine? Yeah. So what this is saying is that there's ranging from 0.5 to almost 1 throughout the 2020 to 24 of EC1. So EC1 is just a subfraction of total PM, right? And then EC2 is also a subfraction. One of the things that I think we need to be careful of is, how much of the fraction of EC1 is of the total PM from, like, non-diesel emissions, versus EC2. What is the relative fraction of diesel emissions, PM versus what would show up at EC2? And obviously for EC2 for diesel, that's easier to know because it's a single source, right? We can pull a diesel engine into a lab and do studies on it and test it, pull different sizes, different ages, different wear and tear and do studies, and they have done this, right? So you can do that. So you can kind of say, okay, well, of this EC2 fraction, if we get a certain concentration, then, we know that that represents X percent of the total emissions from that engine, and we can scale it up. You can also do that with EC1, but you have to do that with all the individual sources of EC1, cars, barbecue, right? Charboiling, smoking, right? Car engines. And those all have different fractions and different ratios. And so it would be hard to look at these numbers and say, this is what's driving the pollution in the community. And in the end, not all pollution is created equal, right? We know that diesel emissions as a whole, which diesel emissions are, what is in diesel emissions? It's hundreds of compounds. That is a very, very toxic kind of group of compounds. And that's more toxic than, say, that same concentration of compound or same concentration of total like PM that comes from car emissions. And so, if just because maybe the PM emissions from diesels are lower than the non-diesel doesn't mean that the health benefits is being driven, or the health effects are being driven by those non-diesel things. And so that's where this kind of source apportionment needs to come from. And then that's where you take that source apportionment, but then you also need to look at what is the relative toxicity of each source. And so what CARB has done and presented in the past was just they looked at the concentrations of these compounds, but then they said, well, if we know what sources are emitting and their concentrations, and we know the relative toxicity of that based off of these other studies, we can look at what is the associated risk, a cancer risk, a non-cancer risk with each pollutant, and kind of take the concentration, multiply it by the risk factors, and give you the risk-based numbers, which I think are more important than the actual concentrations.
Thank you, David. And I know I'm just going to do a little bit of a time check. Jasmine, I see your hand up. If you can make your comment or question brief, and then that way you can move on to the next item as well. But Jasmine.
I will do my utmost.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I wanted to bring up again what was said earlier, that it looks like the emissions are trending down from what we gathered. Like, I just want to repeat that to make sure we're all on the same page about that. However, I guess I was hoping we could get a better context about, like, what does this mean for the CERP? Like, I think these data points are ultimately going to be used to see how well we're doing in implementation and meeting our targets, right? So if you can give us a little bit more context on that. And I think the question about National City is like a very real one for this particular reason. So when I heard that you all thinking about sunsetting or, because this particular data collection, I'm wondering if we're like losing the opportunity to have like the same numbers for National City as like the new air monitors are coming up, to actually see if in fact like non-diesel sources are driving more of the carbon measurements than and maybe it's not the same thing in National City. And I think it'd be really valuable for everybody in the community to like have the opportunity to get deeper into these equivalency numbers. And so maybe take that into consideration, because as we're meeting the CERP implementation goals, like I think that's a gaping data point that might be really important to make a fuller picture.
Noted. Yeah. And I'll bring that back with our and discuss that with our team.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Jasmine. So we're gonna move on. Christine, thank you so much for being here. I think we had your contact info on the chat as well. If folks, you have any questions, I think there are some lingering thoughts. I see that there are some comments as well in the chat. So if folks, you have questions, please reach out to Christine and David. Both our contact information in the chat. So I'd love to hear any other updated side conversations that come out of this meeting. So I'm going to move over to Kevin, and I think Kevin, you should be on.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me all right?
Yes. So,
thank you, Christian.
and I'm gonna remove the pen for myself and pin you. So, Kevin, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Hi. Buenas noches a todos. Tonight I'm going to be talking about our incentive funding plan for the applications we received in our past solicitation here a few months back. If we could go to the next slide, please. So just by way of introduction and an agenda for my presentation, we're going to start with a refresher on participatory budgeting, which we've talked about in the past, and what the community priorities are that we've identified both through those conversations as well as through the CERP. I'm going to give everybody a sense of what the state funding requirements are that we need to keep in mind when we are sort of picking projects to award funding to. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've done historically with our incentive funds as kind of a checkpoint, and that's going to lead into what our current funding plan is. And then from there, I'm going to ask for some feedback from the steering committee. And that's going to both be for our current funding plan, as well as for some of the air purifier program, the future of that program as it relates to residents affected by the Tijuana River Valley sewage crisis. So stay tuned on that. I'll probably kind of dance around the air purifier issue a couple of times, but I will come back to that and provide some context for that before we actually ask for feedback. So put a pin in that. We'll come back to that at the end. But first, incentive funding. So next slide, please. So in the past, I had a big, long definition of participatory budgeting. I don't think we need to go through the whole definition, but just as a bit of a refresher, it's an opportunity for the members of the CSC to get informed about what resources are available for different types of projects, to communicate to us at the Air Pollution Control District what the priorities are as far as which projects we should prioritize with our funding, what type of outreach we should do, who we should speak with, and let know that we do have funding available, all that kind of stuff, as well as proposed projects. There's opportunities for us to identify community projects that are a little bit outside of the normal scope of what the funding typically goes to. And so in these conversations, and again, from the CERP, we've identified certain priorities. So urban greening projects, which we didn't actually receive any applications for. So that's going to inform us that we need to do a better job of outreach in the future. But two types of projects that we did get a lot of applications for were for charging stations for electric vehicles and for low or zero emission vehicle replacements. And then, of course, air filtration has been something else that's been highlighted, excuse me, through our conversations. We also did not get any applications specific to Portside for air filtration. Again, I'll talk more at the end about air purifiers as it relates to the Tijuana River Valley, but that's more with our border community partners. Next slide, please. So I have these two maps here. One's just a zoomed in version of the other. I know this key here is all in English, but I apologize for that. We can really think of a way to get this translated, but I'm going to walk through what the color coding means here. And the reason I have this slide up is really to talk about how we've been directed to spend the funds that we receive in the communities in San Diego County. So you can see, and again, it's in English, but the disadvantaged communities are shown with the colors green, orange, and brown. Those orange and brown colors are tribal lands, which we do have some projects that we work on with tribal folks. They're smaller in scope at the moment. We're trying to expand that. That's a little bit outside of the scope of this presentation. But if you look at the zoomed in map on the right side there, you see that big green area in the middle. That's more or less maps onto the Portside neighborhood. There's that yellow piece there that's still part of the disadvantaged community. As well as down south in San Isidro and then east in El Cajon. Those are really the target areas for our disadvantaged community funding. And the reason that I bring all this up is that when we receive our funding, we receive a grant every year from the state. We have to spend 70% of those funds on projects that benefit those communities that are highlighted in green. And that's really not negotiable. We don't have a lot of wiggle room there. Sometimes we can justify a project benefiting those communities, even if the project is outside. So a good example would be a charging station for vehicles that make trips into the Portside community or into San Isidro. That would justify that as benefiting a disadvantaged community. So again, 70% of all our funds have to go to projects that fall into that category. And then the next level of requirement is that 80% of our funds have to go to either a low income or a disadvantaged. Yeah, Jess, thank you for letting me know. Sorry. Yeah, so I'll slow down a bit. The blue areas are low income communities. And those we have to spend 80% of funds in either disadvantaged or low income communities. Let's see if there's anything else to hit on this slide. I think that's all for this slide. But again, 70% has to go to the communities highlighted in green, and then 80% to either blue or green on these maps. Next slide, please. All right, so besides the sort of geographic requirements that we have for the funding that we spend, we also have a timeline that we have to stick to. Currently, funds have to be spent within 8 years of when we receive them. That used to be a shorter timeline. I think during the pandemic, when things kind of slowed down a little bit, they pushed that out to 8 years. And that sounds like a long time, right? I mean, 8 years is a long time, but with some of these projects, particularly with the infrastructure projects, things can really drag out. I mean, with an infrastructure project, you have to talk about obtaining your supplies, your parts and materials, doing construction, making sure all the electrical power is sufficient to run your charging station, installations. There's a lot of pieces, and if any one of them slows down, it can slow down the entire project. And just for a little bit of info on how we typically go from beginning to end with this contracting cycle, we begin with outreach, right? So we reach out to different companies, could be school districts, anyone that we think might benefit from our funding to be able to do some of these clean air projects. And we let them know to submit an application. When we receive those applications, we have to review them to make sure that the project is eligible for funding. There's lots of rules and requirements that are listed out in our guidelines and in the grants and contracts that we sign with the state to receive the funding. We get into this phase that I have highlighted in the yellow box here. That's actually where we are right now, sort of winding down our pre-inspections and getting into contract execution. So what a pre-inspection is essentially, it's more related to vehicle replacements. But when we replace a vehicle, we have to make sure that the one that we're replacing is functional. In other words, we don't pay for people to replace something that's broken because the goal of our funding is to reduce emissions, right? So we want to be taking a vehicle that would have been releasing pollution into the air, get rid of that, provide the contractor with something cleaner that releases much less pollution, and then we get them under contract to that just has certain requirements to report back to us on the usage of the new equipment, has requirements that they need to follow to receive their funding, all that kind of stuff. Including buying their new piece of equipment and destroying their old piece of equipment so that it can't be used to pollute the air anymore. And at that point, they submit a lot of paperwork to us. We process that and send their funding out. So, excuse me. I wanted to give everybody kind of an idea of why, this 8-year timeline, even though it seems like a long time, we have all these different projects that are all on different timelines and different speeds. The gist of this is that we can't just have this money and wait for perfect projects. If something's eligible, we're really under a time crunch to get that project moving and to get that money spent. So that's kind of not so much bad news, but that's why we have to continually be getting new projects in and not wait for the perfect project. Now, on the other side of that, the state of California has demonstrated that it is committed to the AB617 program moving forward. This next year, after this current set of applications, might be a little leaner. I don't know how much of that has been discussed previously with the CSC, but the way that AB617 was originally created back in 2018, they had a process for funding, and that's going to be transitioning to a sort of a different process next year. And so that transition year might be a little leaner. But after that, we expect the state to kind of bring back those funding levels back to what we've been used to for the past several years. So just a little bit of background on, or kind of a peek under the hood, if you will, of what some of the requirements we have to follow when we're deciding what projects to fund, how much funding to provide, etc. Next slide, please. So just a kind of recap of what's been done so far with AB617 incentive funding. So I broke this into 3 different categories. There's operational projects. So these are projects that have been fully funded. The equipment's out there working as we speak. We spent over $30 million on those types of projects. And the emissions that have been reduced by those projects is equivalent to taking about 22 million miles of heavy-duty truck traffic off of the road each year. So we're really proud of that work that's been done. And as we continue to move forward, we have some projects that are partially completed. Best way to think of that is, say we signed a contract with somebody to replace 10 trucks, and 5 of them have been replaced, and we still have to do 5 more. That would be a partially completed project. And so that's another $4+ million that has either already been spent or is obligated to be spent. And that's another 2.5 million miles of heavy-duty truck traffic removed each year. And then in the final category here, we have our contracted projects. So projects that are under contracted but have not been completed yet. We haven't spent any money or sent any money out to those contractors yet. And that's another $27 million+. It happens to be that all of those projects are infrastructure projects. Like I mentioned previously, those projects do tend to take a little bit longer. And the other piece of that is that we can't calculate emission reductions from these charging infrastructure projects. We would have to essentially be able to tell the future of what types of vehicles are going to charge, what they're replacing, it's just kind of an impossible task. But what we do know is that, indirectly, those are providing emission reduction benefits, right? The more that we have charging stations available, the more that people can use them for, electric vehicles, electric trucks, et cetera, that are obviously much better in terms of not releasing harmful pollution to the air. A couple of projects to highlight that's in that category. The Sky Chargers project in National City is a big charging station project for trucks. The Crowley E-Tug, so the tugboat that was replaced with an electric one. It used to be diesel, now is electric. We still have some work to do on the infrastructure side of that, building out its charging capabilities. And then Chicano Park has a really great project that they're working on to get some charging stations built there as well. So those are, just 3 I wanted to highlight as far as what types of infrastructure projects are in the works already as we move forward. Next slide, please. And so all that talk about charging stations kind of brings me to our high-level plan for our current applications. So this round, and it's kind of the way it shook out with those requirements I mentioned earlier with, where we have to spend the money, how quickly we have to spend the money, all of that has led us to the decision that it makes sense for us to really prioritize our AB617 incentive funding towards electric charging infrastructure, mainly benefiting disadvantaged communities. So I think, like I said, we have to hit that 70% mark. I think we're well into the 80s with where we landed with the breakdown of all the projects and applications that we received and how we want to allocate those funds. We also have a small amount of funding going towards a couple off-road projects operating in disadvantaged communities. I'll have a map in a few slides that kind of shows where, maps out where a lot of these projects are. So I'll talk more about that in just a moment. Next slide, please. And so because we're pushing so much of the AB617 funding towards the charging infrastructure, we did receive a lot of applications for low and zero emission trucks and buses, and we don't want to leave those behind either. So we have other funding grants that we receive from the state. I won't get too deep into that during this presentation, but we're going to prioritize those funds more for the vehicles. And again, the AB617 funds more for the charging stations. One implication of sort of these state level grants, there's one called the Farmer Grant that we used to receive in years past. It's more targeted at agricultural equipment. We did not receive that grant or any funding from that grant this past year. And so that has some kind of downstream effects of impacting how we distribute our funding to other projects. So a lot of those off-road applications that we received, we have to use these other grants for. And so that just kind of changes the calculations for us in terms of how we decide to use each piece of this funding, how we allocate funding towards all these different projects and applications that we receive. Excuse me. Next slide, please. So where that leaves us with a breakdown, and I know it's kind of weird to see a 0 next to on-road. Like I said, we are doing on-road projects. It's just not with AB617 funding. So I want to be clear about that. So where we landed is spending about $20 million on 13 different electric charging infrastructure projects. And again, to be clear there, That does not mean 13 charging stations total. It's much more than that. It's just 13 total projects. So one individual project might be, 20 charging stations. One might be only a couple, but and I don't have those exact numbers for how many stations are going to be put in, but these are, big, large scale projects that are going to be particularly targeted towards heavy duty trucks so that we can really start pushing that transition from diesel trucks and even natural gas trucks towards electric trucks. I mentioned we have a few off-road projects, about $500,000 that we want to allocate towards those. And then we have our air purifier projects for residents affected by the Tijuana River Valley. And this money actually is specifically for school districts down in the region near the Tijuana River Valley, putting air purifiers in those classrooms for students who are, having to breathe in those odors all day. We're trying to alleviate that as much as we can. So this is, again, a kind of a snapshot of the plan for how we're going to send these dollars out to different projects, AB617 specifically. Next slide, please. So like I mentioned, our other grant funds, we're prioritizing towards those low and zero emission vehicle replacements. And we have some additional AB617 project funds going towards air purifiers for schools and daycares. I don't think I mentioned daycares in the Tijuana River Valley region. Next slide, please. So here's that map I mentioned, and just to kind of discuss what the key for this map, how to read this. So all of the black icons are AB617 funding, and all the red ones are other sources of funding. The little battery with a lightning bolt is for charging stations. The truck is for on-road vehicles. The tractor looking icon is for off-road projects. And then the pair of lungs down by Imperial Beach there is for air purifiers. And so you can see as it relates to Portside specifically, you see that big charging station project right there in National City. That's a big one that we are really excited to fund. A couple off-road projects down kind of South National City, Chula Vista region. Other charging stations sort of dotted throughout the county, including that big one down in Otay Mesa, that big black battery. I want to touch on that one briefly. Even though that's down in Otay Mesa, we worked with the applicant, and they provided us documentation that the trucks that will be charged with that charging station run to the port. I don't remember if it was daily or weekly, but it's very frequent trips to the port. And so funding that charging station will, in time, start that transition of fewer diesel trucks going to the port, fewer polluting trucks going to the port, and more of the electric trucks. So that was another one where, like I mentioned earlier, we can justify that as benefiting the port side and benefiting disadvantaged communities, even though the actual location is sort of outside of those communities. So the way that it breaks down, I had that chart on a previous slide that said about $20 million is being spent on infrastructure. A little over 10 million of that is really specifically benefiting the Portside community. There's also another little over $1.2 million for a nearby project in just east of Chula Vista. There's that red battery there. So it's other funding. It's not AB617 funding. I just wanted to highlight it because we can't justify it as a disadvantaged community based on the truck routes that charging station funds, but it is right there next to the community. So, air pollution obviously travels regardless of borders, regardless of maps. And so I wanted to highlight that one as well. And again, those off-road projects there, sort of south of National City, another $500,000 to those. So that's a breakdown of kind of the overall plan. And as we go to the next slide, it'll be time for me to ask for some feedback from you all. And so we'll start with the first question, and I'll pause and see if folks have anything to add. But I'll just ask this question this way. And if you have any questions, clarifying questions, anything like that, feel free to ask. We can go back and look at other slides and discuss some of these specifics. So here's the question. Does the Community Steering Committee support moving forward with this plan for AB617 incentive funding allocation to projects?
So I'm looking to see if folks want to jump in. And Kevin, even if folks can give us even a thumbs up like that I think would help us get the ball rolling. But and Phil, I see your hand up.
Sure. Thanks, Kevin, for all this info. Generally, Yeah, I do agree with how you're proposing this. I can tell my colleagues on the steering committee that in all the research that I've done and trying to work on electrifying trucks, the missing ingredient here in San Diego is the infrastructure. So I think once we get that infrastructure in place, we will start to see more electric trucks operating in our region. I know it's been a big goal of the CSE, so I support that.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, Phil. I agree, that's kind of what we've heard in our discussions is, yeah, we'd love to have an electric truck, but where would we charge it? And so some of that, those projects are happening. Like I said, we have multiple under contract already, but it's going to take a lot of investment to really bring the infrastructure to where we need it, to be able to really transition these trucks over to electric. So yeah, well said, Phil. Thank you.
And then Andrew.
All right, thanks. I just want to, kind of double down on what Phil had mentioned, is that that's exactly right. This is a two-faceted approach to a problem here. And I think that it makes sense then to kind of specialize some of the funding, earmark it for those sorts of projects that will work in tandem as opposed to kind of being direct competes for electrification sources. So I think that's a smart move.
Okay.
Do you want to see if the other folks want to chime in? I see Rosalba put a thumbs up. I think just echoing that support, but I want to see if other folks want to jump in, or have any questions for Kevin. Clarifications I can help inform, I think. Good questions.
Yeah, it's always been kind of a chicken and egg thing for charging stations versus electric vehicles. I see Liana is asking, are there grant funds available now? So yes, but it kind of depends on what type of project. So we do have funds available for our zero emission truck pilot project, which is our program that we have funds for to replace diesel trucks with electric trucks, with the caveat that you don't have to scrap your old diesel truck. We were hearing from certain potential participants, especially smaller businesses, that if you want to grow your operations, it's really painful to take an entire truck off the road for them. And so we said, okay, well, if you can show us that you're sending a diesel truck to the port every day, and we can help fund a new electric truck, and you promise that you're going to use that truck for your port trips, then we can, work out a contract. So that's one specific program that we have kind of rolling available funding for at the moment. As far as kind of all these other, infrastructure and other truck replacements and other types of projects, we will have more funding coming available. We plan to do another round of applications sometime in 2026. Hard to estimate right now. We usually say in the springtime each year. So
is that the Clean Air for All program, Kevin?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Is that the Clean Air for All program that you're referring to?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I have an interesting situation that I was made aware of today, where we have provided the charging infrastructure to support a school district and provided them with a rebate through the Power Your Drive for Fleets program for the chargers. However, the chargers are no longer working. And our program rules prohibit us from, we can't do anything about it in our program just based on the strict program constraints, but they have electric buses. They want more chargers, but they're a school district and they're broke. And it's like, okay, how can they get new chargers to replace the ones that aren't working? And aren't supported by the EVSP any longer.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really glad you brought that up. I actually do have one more slide after this. We can go to it now. We can kind of go back and forth, but one of our big pushes for our next round of funding is going to be electric school buses and charging infrastructure for those. So very timely.
Okay. So that will be through the Clean Air for All?
Yes, exactly.
In the spring.
Obviously, it's very tricky, and we're working on how to get around this because, like you said, the school district doesn't have millions of dollars lying around for these projects. We ran into the same thing with air purifiers at schools, where schools say we would love to participate, but the reimbursement style that this program used to or typically does run on, the school district can't front all that cash and then be reimbursed. And so we've kind of found either like a voucher system or working directly with the company that provides the electric charging stations. We found some workarounds that seem to be helping us get these projects moving. And so we're really trying to revamp and make it, something that, that's the whole goal of the AB617 program, right? Is to support community. School districts are obviously a huge part of that and something that we want to invest in. And so we're actively working on how to get around some of those snags in the way the program is set up. So
got it.
Yeah. Really.
Yeah. The initial thought that I had when this issue was presented to me this afternoon was, okay, we need to point them in the direction of grant funding programs. But, there's rules and regs around those. And obviously the local funds would be probably their best opportunity because this is a unique situation, right?
Definitely.
So
yeah, please stay in touch on that with me and we'll figure out.
Thank you, Kevin.
To get an application in and try to figure that out.
So
sounds good.
Kevin,
Thank you.
Jumping in, just a little bit of time check. Do you want to move forward? So I know we have a second question on here. So I know we have another slide. So do you want me to jump into the next slide or do you want to stick here and then?
Let me go ahead and stick here with this last question and provide a little bit of context. So again, we have used some AB617 incentive funds already for air purifiers. We went before our board back in September and they asked us to assess the feasibility of expanding the Tijuana River Valley Air Purifier Program to more households throughout the region. Our staff ran some estimates and we estimated that could cost as much as $10 million in project funds. We will be presenting more information to the board. We have a December 11th meeting. And after that, we would kind of provide an update to the CSE. But in the meantime, I wanted to raise this question to the CSE to see if there was additional feedback right now that we could include in our update to our board in December. So again, I'll read this question off. Does the steering committee have any feedback on the potential use of AB617 incentive funds to purchase additional air purifiers for residents impacted by the Tijuana River sewage crisis?
So looking at folks, see if there are any thoughts.
Kevin, is there a sense on what proportion of those AB617 funds would be allocated towards the indoor filters as opposed to the charging infrastructure?
Right. So again, our staff estimated that it would be, if we want to cover the households that we're looking at in the region, that it could be up to $10 million of project funds. As far as proportion, it'll depend on what applications we receive in upcoming solicitation, in our upcoming solicitation in 2026. So hard to give a proportion right now, but it would be coming from that same bucket of project funding.
Kevin, I'm just going to move us on to the last slide. I know you have some next steps.
Yes.
I think you noted that December 11th meeting as one of the next steps as well. But yeah, if we can.
Yeah. So I'll wrap up here quickly. Yeah, if you do have any thoughts on the air purifier side of things or really any other feedback, my email address, I'll put it in the chat to make sure you can reach out to me if you have any thoughts. But anyway, what our next steps are now to execute contracts with applicants now that we've almost wrapped up all our pre-inspections. And we're going to begin outreach for our next round of projects, which impromptu started tonight. Thank you, Liana, for bringing up that school district. Like I mentioned, we're going to be targeting zero-emission school buses and charging infrastructure, as well as some zero-emission transportation refrigeration units. So some of those trucks that if you have, food or medicine or anything that needs to be kept cool, a lot of those are diesel powered, and we're exploring funding some replacements for those. And we also want to expand our existing community identified projects. I mentioned the zero emission truck pilot a few minutes ago. We're also working with the port to work on to work out a project plan for zero emission cargo handling equipment, so we can electrify a lot of that equipment at the port that brings in goods and is moving all those heavy things. We want to move that from diesel over to electric as well. So stay tuned on that one. I'll be presenting on that in the not too distant future. And I will wrap up there. I know we have another presentation. So thank you, everybody, for your attention, for your questions, and thank you, Christian.
Thank you, Kevin. And I know, I think if you can send that information, I think for the December 11th meeting, I think that would be a good addition for the weekly digest, I think, following up on the presentation. I think some of the stuff that you shared today. So if you have that information, drop it in the chat, and then we'll make sure to share that along with the CSC as part of that weekly digest as well with your contact info if folks do have any more questions on the topic.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kevin. So running through, we have about 30 minutes left, but we want to make sure we get through the next presentation and then have enough time to wrap up. So with this, Shalom, I'm actually going to hand it off to you, and you'll walk us through this presentation. And just as a note, we will have some polling that happens as part of this. So folks, just be ready for those to pop up on your screen. Shalom.
Thanks, Christian. Next slide, please.
Oh.
Okay, let's do next slide as well. Just kind of skipping through some of these. So thank you all, first of all, for participating in the focus group discussions that happen in August and September. And special thanks to Lauren and David in facilitating those conversations. So we did that kind of visioning starting in July through conversations here. And that visioning continued through those focus group conversations and the survey. And so really this conversation is to provide a summary of what we heard from those focus group conversations and then also in the survey itself, and start to draft a framework for what our work together is going to look like beyond year 5 of CERP implementation. So what I'm going to share with you all today is kind of that high-level draft framework of what that work looks like starting in the new year. And certainly welcome your feedback. Nothing is set in stone. But again, this is informed not only from the summary and analysis of your feedback, but also we looked at previous research studies like the UC Davis evaluation that was done with Dr. Jonathan London last year. And then we also looked at what is the Air District's own internal capacity and CARB's capacity and resources in terms of how that matches with kind of the things are in this draft framework. And also looking at AB617 funding. What does that outlook look like in terms of continuing to support the continual progress that we've been making? So here we are in November, where I'm going to be sharing the draft framework with you all. And Christian, would you mind going to the next slide? The next slide, I do have it, the same information, but in Spanish. I just want to be mindful and uplift that as well. So we're in November now, and where we're today sharing that draft framework. Again, there's going to be more opportunity to engage in this also at our next meeting in January, if need be. Next slide. So there are a number of elements that make up this framework. Excuse me. First, what is our CSC meetings going to look like and our ongoing communications going to look like as well? Secondly, how are we going to be documenting progress moving forward? Third, what does community air monitoring look like in the Portside area? Fourth, what are some priorities for incentive funding program? Fifth, outreach and education. And sixth, how you all are defining accessible and meaningful information sharing and all. And the last one, in terms of what you all shared in terms of what the CSC priority actions will be in year 5 and beyond. The last one is highlighted because we won't have time to get into that today, but we do plan on having that deeper conversation on the CSC priority actions, hopefully at our next meeting, which will take place in January, because at that time we'd like to share with you kind of a 5-year report on CERP progress at that time, so that we can have a more holistic conversation. Next slide.
So I'll jump in real quick on this, which is through this, Shalom is going to be presenting all these different topics. We'll stop at after each topic, run a really quick poll, which is just a Likert scale between and asking your question of how does this align to your vision of how you see post year 5? 1 being not closely, 2 less closely, 3 moderately closely, 4 somewhat closely, and then 5 very closely. So this is just as a reminder, you'll see that on screen as well. The polls will be launched when we get to that point as well. So Shalom, back to you.
Thank you, Christian. All right. So the first item that we'll go through is CSC meetings and communications moving forward. So infused in each one of these sections are also a set of principles we'd like to uphold, but also some logistical elements as well that are important to note. So the first, foster shared decision-making. So maintain meetings as a collaborative space where decision-making power is shared between agencies and community members. Secondly, set a consistent meetings schedule. So here's part of a logistical element. So hold CSC meetings every 2 months or 6 times a year with agendas focused no more than 3 topics at a time so that we have enough space and graciousness to engage in those conversations. Allow for flexibility. So when time-sensitive items arise, that we allow for flexibility in calling for additional meetings during the off months to conduct votes and also conduct votes via email following the existing Portside CSC charter. Next is continue to ensure language access. So continue to provide English and Spanish translation and simultaneous interpretation at all CSC meetings with all ongoing improvements to the interpretation quality as well. Prioritize meaningful topics. So what that means is dedicate meeting time to items that require CSC input or collaboration towards collective goals. And then whereas informational updates could be shared with the CSC through either pre-recorded videos or online postings or monthly digest itself. So really using our meeting time space together on things that are really where you can provide some feedback. And then lastly here, deliver regular communications. So we currently have weekly digests, email digests. Here we're proposing to send monthly communication digests in both English and Spanish. And then for time-sensitive announcements, those will be sent out separately on an as-needed basis. So I believe on your screen, you're going to see pop up a poll, just a kind of a temperature check. And Christian, if you want to walk us through this part as well.
Yes. So the poll will launch. It should be on your screen now. So again, the reminder is on a scale from 1 to 5, 1 this does not align closely to how you would want to see posterior 5, and 5 aligns really closely to what you would like to see. So we have that on the right of the screen. So we'll take a moment, and then we're not going to pause after each of these, but what we are going to be doing is after we presented all the different topics, we'll identify the 2 or 3 depending on time that had the biggest variability with scores, and then maybe have an opportunity to talk through maybe some of the clarifications on those or issues that folks are seeing on them. So we'll stay on here for another 10 seconds. And folks can also add their responses in the chat as well. So and maybe I did not add that, but if you also type them in the chat, we'll note those as well. And thank you, Jasmine. Cool. Okay, we can end our poll, and Sean, I think we'll keep going through these.
Christian, will the results show up at the end or after
they should be, we can pull them up right now. So Jazz, can you pull them up? Yep. So
Okay.
we're seeing 43% voted on 5, which is that they align very closely with folks' vision. And then we did have about 7% saying that they loosely line up with their vision. So
Great. Thank you so much, Christian. So we'll go to the next section here, documenting progress. And one thing I do want to note as well, What we're sharing with you today is also on a handout on the website that we'll put in the chat box after my presentation today. So documenting progress, so report on CERP progress, so present an annual report on CERP implementation at a CSC meeting each year, with reports also posted online. Develop easy to understand tools such as story maps, dashboards, or other visuals to show progress. So for example, what's the percentage complete on a particular CERP action? Track public health outcomes. So work with public health agencies to track health indicators and report on progress. Measure emissions reductions. Maintain a Portside-wide emissions inventory from stationary and mobile sources to track reductions, and compare to baseline inventory from CERP. So we've heard a lot of this. This is where we'll need our partners at CARB to support with as well. Report on incentives. Publish an annual incentives report detailing funding associated with emissions reduction and tangible community benefits. And then document regulatory impacts. Report annually on emissions reduction achieved through state and regional rules developed and implemented. And then lastly, reporting on compliance efforts. Provide an annual update to CSC regarding compliance activities in the Portside area. So for example, if someone calls in with a complaint, you know, how many complaints did the Portside CSC see in any given year? What were the natures of the complaints? What was the follow-up to those complaints in terms of the inspectors at APCD? All right, we're ready for the poll. Christian?
Again, same thing. And again, I'll start off with, if you can fill it on the poll on Zoom, or you can just add it in the chat. And we have a nice kind of break in the chat as well, noting where the responses are coming in. We'll keep the poll open for a few minutes, and then we'll be tabulating on the back end as well, just to note the responses. So the chat responses are also being included in the tabulation that we have on the back end. So just to share that with folks. Give it another 10 seconds. We're seeing some responses coming in the chat as well. So we can end our poll. We'll share results. So seeing 47% fives. That's not including the percentage of fives and votes on the chat, just off the Zoom, 47%, and then 18% of threes, which is that it's moderately closely aligned to their vision. And then in the chat, we're also seeing fours and fives as well. So we'll keep moving to our next item.
Thank you. So community monitoring, continue to share data regularly. So provide monitoring data on a quarterly basis through live presentations at CSC meetings. Offer accessible summaries. So distribute high-level summaries of monitoring results, including visuals and year-to-year trends via email and online postings for easy community access. Expand monitoring locations, so prioritize installing monitors in West National City to begin collecting localized data, and then connect data to health sources and community goals. So make monitoring data easier to understand by showing how it relates to public health when able to, local pollution sources and CERP strategies, which Christine demonstrated very well tonight. Provide clear expectations that help residents see what data means for their health, their neighborhood, and quality of life. And lastly, access to real-time air quality information. Provide education on where community members can access real-time air quality alerts, such as the Air Now program. And then, Christian, we're ready for the polls.
We'll launch our next one. So again, 5 being that it aligns very closely, and then 1 not closely at all to your vision. So again, feel free to drop it on the chat or using the Zoom poll tool. And we'll give folks 40 seconds. And then Andrew, I see your note, so we'll mark that note and Shalom, if you can track that note as well from Andrew.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Andrew, in terms of like, to answer your question, like if we can't do source apportionment, it would be similar to how Christine presented this morning, or I'm sorry, this morning. It's been a long day. Presented earlier this evening, where we know the general sources. Let's say, for example, tonight was diesel particulate matter. We're not able to say like X amount is ocean-going vessels versus heavy-duty diesel trucks.
Right.
But we do know generally what are the typical sources within Portside as it relates to tonight was diesel particulate matter.
Respectfully, you got to be careful about that because you're having it both ways with those data sources. If we're saying that the data that the model trends are not enough, especially from sources like CARB, you say you can't talk about it from the trends. You can't also apply it backwards like that. I wouldn't ascribe to that. That's not a good idea.
If I may, this was also done some time ago by CARB. They develop a model where they identify the different sources with the risk associated to those sources. So we can also look at that model for some of that information.
And are we going to look at current emission?
To the extent that we can, we have requested that information, as I've shared in the past, to CARB, and we are continuing our conversations with them to see once the timing of when it would be possible for us to have that information.
Okay, and that would be very helpful to have as soon as possible. We agree that that's sort of, we'll call it the gold standard, but I still fail to see why we can't use the current model trends to kind of get a sense on the direction, similar to what's been going on with the monitoring locations for the real-time data. That doesn't make sense to me, Domingo.
Because we're trying to look at it from the community standpoint, and the current models that we have do not provide that information or that granularity to be able to get a better assessment of the information we're trying to look at.
No, agreed, but I think that it would be a far stretch to suggest that what happens from a county-wide level wouldn't also be somehow applicable to the communities as well, right?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
It's interesting that what we're seeing, these macro trends that happen on the county level, I think it wouldn't be too much of a stretch to suggest that there'd be some sort of trend change at the community level as well. We're seeing it in Caltrans data and with other sources. Like I don't know if it's fair to say that the Portside is solely in a vacuum when the rest of the county is changing.
Well, we do know for a fact that these communities are disproportionately impacted by air pollution, so we really can't make that.
Are we sure about that?
We are. And we can't really make that jump to say that what we're seeing at the regional level is reflected the same in these different communities. That's the very reason why programs like AB617 exist. So we really need to be careful about those, looking at it from that standpoint too. But I don't want us to deviate too much from the discussion.
But this is very important as far as like the priority actions and as far as what we're expecting from the community monitoring. And that's the only reason why I bring it up, Domingo. And I apologize if there's a sense of urgency with some of my actions and my candor right now, but it's because I fear that we're kind of getting too far ahead without talking about these greater trends in both emissions as well as the health outcomes. There's some very interesting statistics from the San Diego Health and Human Services data that I don't know if the APCD or the CSC has had a chance to review in tandem that might help inform how we want to approach these. So that's my concern.
I'll welcome Domingo if you want to connect with Andrew offline, I think, just to make sure that we can get through this. Yeah.
But Christian, not just with me, because I'm only one member of the CSC.
And I think we can have Domingo report back.
Andrew, I really appreciate your comments. They have been raised before. I just want to circle back to our community agreements. just to be mindful of providing space for others to share as well, and for us to get through this as well. So I appreciate your comments, Andrew.
And I appreciate that you've given me the space to speak, because this is important. And as a member, I recognize that. And so, yes, I agree, we should move on. But thank you for the time that you've given me so far.
Yeah, all right, thank you. All right, we're going to go on to the next one, please. So incentives program. So maintain the participatory budgeting kind of process that Kevin shared a bit about, just so that the CSC can continue to help prioritize what specific types of projects or programs that will be done, that outreach will be completed to receive funding, and then have those frequent updates. Advanced electrification outreach, so focus outreach, particularly with smaller independent companies on electrification infrastructure and technologies to reduce emissions and improve local air quality. So solicit input from stakeholders such as port tenants, portside businesses, and so forth. And then lastly here, support community benefit programs. So conduct, excuse me, conduct targeted outreach for potential applicants to expand incentives programs that provide immediate tangible benefits using AB617 funds, and also the Maritime Industrial Impact Funds by the Port of San Diego, and other sources for community benefits such as air purifiers, urban greening, and other community health and mitigation efforts. And so, as Kevin mentioned in his presentation earlier this evening, we didn't have any applications here, but that means we really need to start to do more outreach, specifically engaging folks who could then apply for funds for these types of community benefit projects. All right.
So moving on to the poll again. We'll run through this one a little bit faster, just to make sure we get through the last two as well. So we'll give folks about 30 seconds to get the responses in. So again, 1 not closely and 5 very closely. And then if folks want to drop the responses as well in the chat, we'll be noting those in the back end as well. We'll end our poll, and then we can move on to the next one. So sharing high results are just kind of consistent across 4 and 5, with both of them at 41% just. And then a couple votes came in at 3, and also seeing a few, or at least one in the chat, a couple 4 or 5s as well.
Thank you, Christian. And this one is, there's a lot, so I'll try my best to go through it as quickly as possible. But really, the first one's about recruiting community CSC members, particularly cultivating youth leadership. So seeing more youth in this space. Engage schools and families, so do more outreach at the local schools, and also be able to provide them with updates on the CERP as well. So oftentimes folks can't be in this space, but how can we take that information to where folks are at the schools? Provide learning opportunities. So it could be maybe site visits to see the infrastructure, technologies, or even monitoring locations, so that we can contextualize the things that we talk about here. Also, cross-community learning and collaboration. So create opportunities for this CSC to get together with the CSC members at the international border as well, so that learning could be shared. Increase outreach on the asbestos remediation program and enforcement around that. Share information about APCD's complaint program, and maintain a strong compliance presence in the community. Deliver ongoing education about sources of emissions, enforcement processes, connection between health and air pollution. And then lastly, support community member readiness and participation. So offer periodic pre-meeting briefings and onboarding materials to help new and existing CSC members understand the CSC structure, the roles, ongoing work, and issues being discussed at the meetings. For example, provide meeting information in advance and use facilitation techniques that support inclusive participation.
So moving on to this poll. So is launched in the Zoom, and now questions also in the chat. So do about 30 seconds on this one as well. And I know we have one final one after this. And then we'll have a couple minutes, I think, for any follow-up questions or clarifications. Sharing our results on this one, we are seeing higher response rate 4 or 5, so that it is aligning a lot closer to their vision. And then a few responses on 4, but then also in the chat we're seeing 5s and 4s.
And this last section here is around accessible and meaningful information. So the importance of eliminating technical terms or jargon in like our writing materials or even in our presentation. Provide simplified summaries of reports, presentations, and documents that highlight the key takeaways and bite-sized relatable updates. Use charts, diagrams, infographics, videos, and other visuals to make complex data easier to understand. And then also, be able to connect the data to potential impact. So linking it with community health, air quality improvements, or tangible outcomes. Being able to, at the end of the day, right, be able to answer the question, what does this mean for me and my family's health and quality of life? So we'll pause here for the poll.
Again, this is our last one. So just the same spiel, which is Zoom poll going. We have our question in the chat. And we'll give folks a couple seconds before we move on. So sharing the results for this last one. So seeing a few responses coming in for 2 and 3 as well. So each of those got a vote on here. And then split between 4 and 5. I'll see in the chat 1, 5 coming in. So that actually takes us through the polling portion of this. Shalom, I know we had some questions for folks looking at time, but I know that looking at the back end results, looking at which ones of the topics have the most variation across the scores, it seems like that CSC meetings and communications, that first one was the one that had the most variation. But I do want to see maybe if folks have any questions on that topic, any thoughts and anything that, could be clarified or improved on. And I think Shalom, anything else there on that topic? And I could go back if folks want that. And again, the one that we are talking about is CSC meetings, which talk about frequency, how often the group is meeting, communication that's happening on off months, and then some of that flexibility that would be included in there to adjust for priority items. And I see Andrew has a question. Is there an expectation to return to in person? Shalom.
Yeah, we'd like to have some in person in the new year, so we're working out those logistics as well. But yeah, we'd like to have some of these in person as well. And I do apologize. We don't unfortunately have as much time as I'd hoped for the discussion. on these, but I wanted to, first do a temperature check where folks are. And I would like to continue kind of the opportunity for a conversation at our next meeting, but also maybe see, maybe we could send out a survey of some sort, as well as a follow-up, so that folks can take that in the next 2-3 weeks while they have an opportunity to kind of digest the elements in this framework itself.
Shilin, we can send that along with then the scores, the tabulated, I think, both the chat responses and the Zoom poll, so folks can see how the rest of the CSC responded to those polls as well. So that's something we can send along for everyone.
Yeah. And the key thing, maybe what we'll include in the survey as well is these questions here as well, like what resonated with you most, maybe what are some concerns, or what are some other elements you'd like to see as well. And for the purposes of the kind of the survey, we'll focus on the elements that we touched on today, and then we'll have the CSC priority actions conversation in January.
That works. All right, folks, I do note that we are at time, so I'm going to run through kind of our closing of our meeting as briefly as possible. So I do want to note that the reminder, I think, and Shalom, you've already alluded to this, which is one, I think that we have our January 27 meeting. We are not meeting in December. So that is of note. So folks should be receiving a new calendar invite for the new meeting cadence, and that will be coming from the Kearns and West team. Sean, I think you noted that we'll be sending that weekly digest with information, this survey, and then I think we talked about including some information that Kevin presented today as well for the December 11th meeting that is happening for incentive funding. So before we close, I do want to move to formally close our meeting. So I do want to see if there are any other comments or announcements from folks before we move to adjourn our meeting. And if there is nothing, I'd like to see if someone would like to make a motion to adjourn our meeting.
This is Jasmine, motion to adjourn.
We have Jasmine as a first. Do we have a second?
Second.
That was Phil.
Rosalba.
Thank you, Rosalba. So all those in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. So with that, we wrap up today's meeting. Thank you, everyone, for the productive conversation, discussion. We appreciate everyone being here. Thank you, Margarita, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a happy holidays. We'll see everyone in January.
Okay, thank you.
All right, folks.
See you in 2026.
2026. All right, folks.
Thank you.